You were an astronaut. It was a simple job, they said. You fix satellites, you check gauges, you float in the beautiful, silent dark. The Earth was a blue and white marble below. It was perfect. It was a routine day in a routine life. That was the last normal thought you ever had. The anomaly did not arrive. It simply was. One moment, there was only the sun and the stars. The next, the sky began to burn. It was not fire. It was color. Impossible colors that had no names. They swirled like oil on water. They painted the void with shades of thought and dream. Your radio crackled with panicked voices. Mission Control was screaming. Your crewmates were shouting. But you heard none of it. A great and terrible silence fell over you. The colors pulsed. They reached for your ship, for you. You felt a pull, not on your body, but on your soul. You were outside, floating without a suit. The cold vacuum did not touch you. The burning radiation was a gentle warmth. The impossible star fire washed over you. It unwrote you. It tore you apart atom by atom. And then, it put you back together again. Better. You awoke in a sterile white room, the med bay on the station. The lights were too bright. The hum of the life support was a symphony. The quiet worry of the doctor was a roar in your mind. You felt everything. You felt the spin of the station. You felt the faint pull of the moon. The world was no longer just things you could see and touch. It was a river of data, a constant flow of information. You saw the electrical signals in the doctor's brain. You heard the whisper of cosmic rays passing through the hull. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. They asked you questions. How do you feel? What do you remember? You tried to explain. You tried to describe the starfire. But the words were small and clumsy. How do you explain color to a man born blind? How do you describe a new sense to a world that only has 5? You were different. You knew it. They knew it too. They saw it in your eyes. The calm stillness where panic should have been. You were no longer just an astronaut. You were something else. A secret that had just been born. A key to a door nobody knew existed. They kept you in quarantine. A comfortable prison. They watched you. They studied you. They scanned you with every machine they owned. The readings came back normal, human. But you knew the truth. The change was not in your flesh. It was deeper. You sat on your cot. A glass of water rested on the table. You remembered the feeling of the starfire, the sense of effortless control. A thought bloomed in your mind. Just a whisper of an idea. You focused on the water. You thought of it being warmer. Steam began to curl from the surface, a small, impossible plume of vapor. Your heart hammered in your chest. It was real. This was real. You took a breath. You looked at the glass again. You imagined it lifting from the table, just a few inches. It floated. The glass hovered in the air, perfectly still. Shimmering in the sterile light, you had not moved a muscle. You had not spoken a word. You had simply willed it to be so. The world was no longer a set of rules. It was a canvas, and you had just found the brushes. You gently lowered the glass. It settled on the table without a sound. A quiet laugh escaped your lips. It was a giddy, terrified sound. You could reshape reality with a thought. You wondered if this worked on the station's coffee. It could certainly use the help. The cameras in your room saw it all. The floating glass. The silent, focused look on your face. The world outside your little white room went mad. The recordings were classified in seconds. They were shown to presidents and generals. They were analyzed by the greatest minds on the planet. They stopped calling you by your name. You became a designation, the anomaly, Project Starfire. You were no longer a person. You were an event, humanity's first and only miracle, a miracle that could be aimed, a miracle that could be weaponized. You were moved to a secret facility deep underground. They told you it was for your protection. You knew it was for theirs. They were afraid of you. You could not blame them. How do you guard a person who can walk through walls? How do you contain a mind that can touch the stars? You became the planet's most guarded secret, a ghost in the machine of global power. They gave you anything you wanted: books, music, any food you could imagine. All they asked in return was your cooperation. They wanted to understand you, to control you. But you knew they never could. It was like trying to bottle a hurricane. In the quiet solitude of your gilded cage, you explored. You did not need to leave the room. Your senses were no longer bound by distance. You reached out with your mind. You felt the slow, steady beat of the Earth's molten heart. You felt the rustling of leaves in a forgotten jungle. You began to see the world as it truly was, not as a collection of solid objects, but as a shimmering web of energy, a dance of probabilities and patterns. The universe was not a machine, it was a thought, and you were finally learning its language. You saw space-time itself, a vast, intricate fabric. Gravity was not a force, it was a depression in the fabric. Time was not a line, it was a current flowing through it. And you could do more than see it. You could touch it. You could pull at the threads. With immense concentration, you found a single thread, a strand of reality. You pulled it gently. For a moment, the light in your room bent. The corners seemed to warp. The sound of a guard's footsteps outside your door skipped a beat. You had edited a single second of existence. It was the most profound thing you had ever done. It was more terrifying than the starfire, more exhilarating than floating in space. You practiced this new art, weaving the fabric. You learned to fold space, to create small, momentary tunnels between 2 points in your room. A pen on your desk would disappear. It would reappear on your bookshelf. A simple, childish trick with impossible physics. A joke for an audience of one. You were a god in training, learning the rules of your own divinity. The power was intoxicating, but you felt a growing loneliness. You were the only one of your kind, a single, silent being of immense power. You were drifting away from the world you were born to. As you grew into your power, something else stirred, far away in the deep, silent void. Something ancient and cold. It had slept for eons, dreaming slow, patient dreams in the darkness between galaxies. Your birth was a sudden, bright light in that darkness, a stone thrown into a still, cosmic pond. It awoke. Its attention, vast and indifferent, turned toward the source of the ripple, toward your solar system, toward Earth. It did not feel malice. It did not feel curiosity. It felt a sense of duty, a cosmic gardener noticing a new and potentially troublesome weed. You felt its gaze upon you, a pressure in your mind, a shadow falling across your soul. It was a consciousness of unimaginable scale, older than mountains, older than stars. Its thoughts were not words, they were concepts. They were axioms of existence, and one of them was judgment. The pressure intensified. A wave of pure, dispassionate inquiry washed over the solar system. It was not a communication, it was a scan, a deep, invasive probe that cataloged everything. The gas giants, the asteroid belts, the fragile blue world teeming with chaotic life. And you. the impossible anomaly at its center. Humanity did not feel this scan, but you did. You felt it in every fiber of your being. Their scout arrived without warning. It simply appeared in orbit around Mars, a perfect, seamless obsidian teardrop. It was 1,000 meters long. It absorbed all light and sensor readings. To human instruments, it was a hole in space, a patch of missing reality. Panic erupted across the globe. For the first time, humanity knew it was not alone, and its first visitor was silent, inscrutable, and terrifying. Nations aimed their arsenals at the sky. Fleets of warships, so powerful by human standards, seemed like toys. They were preparing for a war they could not possibly win. The generals came to you. Their faces were grim. Their minds were a storm of fear and aggression. They showed you the images. They asked you to destroy it, to wipe the silent ship from the sky, to show them the power of their secret weapon. You looked at the image of the teardrop ship. You felt the ancient mind within it. Cold, patient, judging. You knew that steel and fire would be useless. Violence would only confirm their worst fears about your world. You had to answer them, but not with a weapon. You had to answer them with your will. You closed your eyes. You reached out, not with force, but with thought. You bypassed their ship's hull. You bypassed their technology. You touched the mind within. You did not send words. You sent a single, complex idea. You sent them the feeling of a child's laughter, the warmth of the sun on skin, the bitter taste of grief, the fierce, irrational love of a mother for her child. You showed them humanity. The scout ship did not react, but the mind within paused its judgment. It had expected a challenge. It had expected fear or aggression. It had not expected art. It had not expected love. It had not expected chaos packaged in such a fragile, beautiful form. For the first time in 1,000,000 years, the ancient power was surprised. The weight of infinite choice settled upon you. The alien presence at Mars was a symptom. The disease was here on Earth. With a single thought, you could end all conflict. You could rewrite the human mind to erase greed and hatred. You could force peace upon the world. You could cure every disease, feed every hungry child. You could make Earth a paradise, a perfect, tranquil garden. The temptation was immense, a siren song of ultimate compassion, to fix everything, to wash away all the pain. But you saw the cost. A world without struggle is a world without growth. A world without pain is a world without courage. If you took away their flaws, would you not also take away their soul? Humanity was defined by its imperfections, by its messy, glorious, terrible freedom to choose. You feared the loss of the person you once were, the astronaut who looked at the Earth with simple awe. If you became the architect of humanity's fate, you would cease to be human. You would become something other, a distant, lonely God watching over its flawless, uninteresting creations. You would be as cold and detached as the gardeners who now watched you. This was the true test, not the ship in the sky, but the conflict in your heart. To find your answer, you knew you had to understand time. You had to see the grand sweep of existence. You left your body behind, a quiet, breathing shell in a secure room. Your consciousness slipped its leash. You became a disembodied point of view, a ghost in the river of time. You went backward first. You watched the pyramids rise from the sand. You heard the first words spoken by your ancestors. You saw the ice ages carve the continents. You flew through primordial jungles where strange creatures roamed. You saw humanity as a fragile, flickering candle in a vast, ancient darkness. Then you went forward. You saw cities of light and crystal. You saw humanity reach for the stars in ships of its own design. You saw them stumble. You saw them fall. You saw them rise again and again. Their spirit was a stubborn, resilient flame. You drifted further. You watched the sun swell into a red giant. It consumed the inner planets in a final, fiery embrace. You saw the Earth, your home, return to star stuff. You felt a pang of loss that transcended time itself. You watched galaxies collide in a slow, silent dance that lasted for billions of years. You saw new stars born from the dust of the old. You watched the universe grow cold and dark as the last star died. And in the end, there was only silence. And you. During your journey through the ages, you brushed against the ancient mind again, the one from the scout ship. But this time, you were on its level, outside of normal space-time. You did not just feel its presence. You understood its history, its purpose. They were not conquerors. They were not destroyers for the sake of it. They called themselves the gardeners of reality. They believed the universe was a delicate structure, a garden that required constant tending. They had watched life bloom on a billion worlds. They saw civilizations as plants. Some grew into beautiful, stable forms. They contributed to the cosmic ecosystem. Others grew wild, chaotic. They became like weeds, consuming resources, spreading disorder, threatening the stability of the garden itself. When they found such a civilization, they pruned it. It was not done with anger. It was a dispassionate, necessary task. Like a gardener pulling a weed to save the flowers. They had done it thousands of times. They erased species they deemed unworthy of existence. Their purpose was to preserve order, to stamp out the unpredictable variable of unchecked chaos. And in you, in humanity, they saw the most chaotic weed they had ever encountered. You returned to your body, to the present. The knowledge settled within you. You understood the enemy. They were not evil. They were tidy. And they saw your entire species as a mess that needed cleaning up. They saw your art as noise, your love as a chemical imbalance, your hope as a statistical anomaly. You saw humanity with new eyes, not just as a flawed species, but as a force of nature. You saw the wars, the pollution, the cruelty, the endless cycle of self-inflicted wounds. The gardeners were not wrong in their assessment. Humanity was chaotic. It was dangerous. It was a risk to the cosmic order. But you also saw a child sharing their last piece of bread. You saw a scientist weeping with joy at a new discovery. You saw lovers walking hand in hand under the moon. You saw the breathtaking beauty of a symphony, the defiant hope in a protest song. Humanity was not a weed. It was a wildflower, unpredictable, messy, growing in the cracks of reality. Its chaos was not a flaw. It was its greatest strength. It was the engine of its creativity, its resilience, its beauty. You made your choice. You would not let the gardeners pave this paradise to put up a parking lot. You chose to defend the glorious, beautiful chaos. The gardeners had made their decision. The single scout ship was just an observer. The real fleet arrived. They did not warp into existence with a flash of light. They simply faded into view. A silent, overwhelming presence. Thousands of perfect obsidian ships. They blotted out the stars. They arranged themselves in a flawless geometric pattern around the solar system. A cage of impossible power. There were no threats, no demands for surrender. Their silence was more terrifying than any declaration of war. It was the silence of an exterminator, before they begin their work. On Earth, the world held its breath. Every telescope, every sensor was pointed at the silent armada. The leaders of nations sat in their bunkers. They watched the screens in stunned disbelief. Their most powerful weapons were like pebbles against a mountain. An entire solar system waited for your answer, for your action. They expected a battle, a glorious, doomed last stand. They did not understand the nature of this war. You stood in your room, but your senses were everywhere at once. You felt the cold perfection of their fleet. You felt the terrified, defiant hearts of 7 billion humans. You knew you could not fight them on their terms. To match force with force would be to lose. To destroy their ships would be a temporary victory at best. They were an idea, and you cannot kill an idea with explosions. You had to fight the very concept that drove them, their core belief, the unwavering certainty that order is the only good, that chaos is a flaw to be eliminated. You were not going to fight their ships. You were going to fight their philosophy. You reached out with your mind. Your consciousness expanded. It touched every ship in their fleet. It touched every ancient mind within them. You did not attack. You did not push. You simply opened a door. You did not show them the chaos of humanity. They already saw that. Instead, you showed them the chaos within their own perfect system. You introduced a single new variable into their ancient, unshakable logic. You gave them the gift of doubt. You posed a question, a whisper in their collective mind. How do you know you are right? You showed them 1 billion possible futures. Futures where their pruning led to a sterile, dead universe, an orderly graveyard. You showed them futures where the chaos they so feared gave birth to new forms of existence, beings of unimaginable beauty and complexity, beings that could only arise from the messy soil of unpredictability. You rewrote the fundamental law of their being. You did not change their minds for them. You gave them the ability to change their own minds. You introduced the concept of what if, the idea that their perfect model of reality might have a flaw. You showed them that true order is not the absence of chaos. It is the understanding of it. The conflict did not end with a bang. There were no exploding ships, no beams of light crisscrossing the solar system. It ended with a whisper, a single, shared thought that rippled through the Gardener Armada. The thought was uncertainty. Their perfect geometric formation wavered. The ships, once locked in rigid synchronicity, drifted slightly. The cold, unified mind of the gardeners fractured into thousands of individual consciousnesses, each one contemplating a new, terrifying, and wonderful possibility. The possibility that they could be wrong. Their absolute certainty was broken. Their ancient purpose was now a question, not a command. They could no longer justify their actions with the cold logic of necessity. You had not defeated them. You had freed them. One by one, the obsidian ships began to fade. They did not flee. They retreated. They turned back toward the deep void, not as a unified armada, but as a scattered collection of pilgrims, each on a new journey to find a new purpose, or perhaps to learn to live with no purpose at all. You had given the universe the greatest gift of all, true, beautiful, terrifying uncertainty. The stars returned to the sky over Earth. The great shadow was gone. Humanity celebrated a victory it did not understand. They believed their defiance or some secret weapon had saved them. They would never know that their world was spared not by a battle, but by a debate, a philosophical argument that reshaped the soul of an ancient power. You did not join the celebration. Your work was done, but your journey was just beginning. You could never go back. You were no longer the astronaut who left Earth. You were something else now. Something more. You had touched the fire of creation and been reborn. You left your physical body for the last time. It was an anchor you no longer needed. You let it rest, a silent monument in its lonely room. Your consciousness ascended. You became a silent presence in the heavens, a guardian not of humanity, but of its potential. You became a myth, a whisper among the new star-faring humans who would one day venture forth. They would tell tales of a silent protector, the ghost of Saul, the first and last of your kind, the Earthborn God. Your lonely watch begins anew. You are the keeper of the chaos, the guardian of the wildflower, and you are forever alone.